the tools that can be used to unlock prosperity for any given nation is trade. At the same time, trade can be used as a weapon to achieve a certain end that a country may have. In view of what's been happening on the global trade scene, we are talking about the trade wars involving China and the United States of America. Today on the People Space podcast, we are looking at the potential impact that is likely to have on a country such as Zambia. As you may be aware, we obviously don't live in a vacuum as a country. And joining me is somebody who is very special to me. And this is no other than Trevor Simumba. He is an international trade expert and a consultant. Now, I say it is very special to me because when I began my journalism career, he was one person that gave time to be able to mentor me into business reporting, helping me understand, the nitty-gritties of the job itself. And partly, I'm proud to announce that I am today because this man gave me time. So it's a pleasure to have you, Trevor, today.
Thank you for your kind words, Wetson. And it's good to see you. It's been a while. But I know you always keep in touch. Even when I was in Ethiopia, you would always send me. And I think our last interview was via video call.
Yes.
So I'm happy to be here. And it's great to discuss this topic, which is close to my heart.
So as we start our conversations with the People Space podcast, obviously we have a tradition where we ask our guests just to be able to tell us a little bit about themselves beyond the profession. Because as you may be aware, many times people know us for what we do and not really who we are. So just tell briefly the people who Trevor is outside the topic of trade and international trade. And I know you've done quite a lot on the African continent. And by the way, there's somebody I met in Ethiopia. This I think I've never shared with you. There's a gentleman I met the time I went for the Global Industrialization Week, who Zambia, he was like, "You're from Zambia." So he mentioned 3 people: Kenneth Kaunda, Christopher Katongo, and Trevor Simumba. So who is Trevor Simumba?
Where was he from? Gambia? Was he
Yes,
Gambian?
yes.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think I even probably know who it was. Must have been Omar Baji, who was the director of industry when I was in Gambia. Yeah, so I mean, I'm a passionate soccer fan, first of all. 100% Arsenal. I'm a Ghana for life. I spent all my school years, primary and secondary school here in Zambia, in only 2 schools, Jacaranda Primary School, and then I went to Munali Secondary School. And then after that, that's when I went to the UK for university, which was a deliberate decision. Being as we call an Amwanga bull, my father said to me, "Look, if you don't want to go to UNZA and you want to go straight to the UK, you need to raise the money yourself." And so for 1 year, I moved between Lusaka and Nakonde and Dar es Salaam, and I was trading. I was actually trading in beans, kapenta, rice, and any other commodity that I could trade in, and to raise the money. And I managed to raise that money within a year, close to $18,000 at that time. And Auntie Shirley Tole, she's my witness because she was director of exchange control at the time I was leaving to go to the UK, and she's the one who issued me the check. What we call it, draft. We used to do drafts in those days, not the way it is, like a check, basically a check that you can go and cash when you reach that country, a foreign exchange check. So I'm a family person. I'm the oldest in my family. Okay, I have 4 sisters, 2 brothers. I have a family of 7, what I call blended family.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like I said, I really enjoy soccer. So I spend a lot of my weekends watching football, both local and foreign. So my local team is Cowboy Warriors. Yeah, I'm a Cowboy Warriors fan. And then, as I said, Arsenal in terms of the UK. The interesting thing about Arsenal is that I used to support Arsenal even before I went to the UK. But what happened was the first place that I stayed in is an area called the Seven Sisters Road, which is basically very close to Arsenal, but also to Tottenham. So lucky for me, I was on the side of the road, which was Arsenal. And I could actually, in those days, from the top of my apartment, I could actually see into Highbury. That time Arsenal was still playing at Highbury. So I used to host on game days. I used to host like drinks with lots of people, and then I charged them like £3 to be able to watch the game from my window, through the window, and would have our drinks and we'd be watching the football
You took
match for free.
entrepreneurship to the UK.
Yes.
Once a trade expert. Anyway,
Yes.
I think that qualifies why you're a trade expert. Who
Exactly.
it's like you just don't have the theory, but
No.
even the practice side of
Yeah.
things actually comes with it.
We are traders. We are
Yeah.
born traders. Namwangas, Mambwes, Lungus, we are born traders.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, another interesting thing, again, that makes it very special for you to be on this platform is that, as our viewers may be aware, this is a CTPD initiative. It's a brainchild of the Center for Trade Policy and Development. And you also have your ties to CTPD.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that before we get into the
Yeah.
conversation.
So I've been part of CTPD when it was still Civil Society Trade Network of Zambia. Okay, CSTNZ. Okay, I was a member of that network with people like Ruben Lifuka. You know, Xavier Mwambwa was our chief executive at the time. Xavier, who's now in New York, at you know, and then we and Madam Jennifer Sakala. We were a number of us, and so then we created what we call Center for Trade Policy and Development. I continued my membership there, and then I served on the board for 4 years. First as vice chairperson of the board, and then the last 2 years as chairperson of the board. And during my time, that's the time we recruited Isaac Mwaipopo as our executive director. And he was very young at that time. And actually, I put my head on the block, you know, because I insisted that, look, if we don't give a chance to young people to get these positions, how are they going to gain the experience? So Isaac, I'm very proud to say that I've seen how Isaac has mentored more young people, and the institution has grown tremendously. And I'm still a member, and now I'm an associate fellow. So I'm called upon once in a while to conduct research and, you know, support the CTPD, and which I enjoy to do.
Okay, interesting. Let's now get into our conversation. Obviously, we know that a lot has been going on the international trade scene, the United States of America. You know, Trump, quite an interesting individual, I must say. And, you know, there's always, you know, headlines everywhere talking about, you know, the decision or this executive announcement from Donald Trump that has to do with trade, with, of course, a huge impact on the international scene. Just bring us up to speed of how this trade war that we've seen happening is going to affect global trade and possibly the global economic outlook itself.
Yeah. Look, Mr. Trump, when he was campaigning, he was very clear about his policies, okay, and what he planned to do. And the American people decided that his policies, his plan was better than the Democratic Party nominee. So let's first accept the fact that the American people elected Donald Trump as president of America. You remember he campaigned on America first, okay? So putting America's interests first, which I expect from every president anywhere in the world. You put your country's interests first. Now, the reason why the world is so preoccupied and in uncertainty is because the US is the biggest economy in the globe, right? Followed by China, and then I believe India. I'm sorry, Germany, and then India, because the IMF recently released the global economic report, which shows that the US is still number one in terms of size of economy. All right, but followed closely by China and Germany and India. Like I say, India has risen quite quickly to fourth. So, and India is moving quite quickly to probably be third. It will surpass Germany quite soon. So, the fact that America is the biggest economy, okay. Secondly, America is also the biggest market, right, for exports from all over the world, right? But in particular, from China, from Europe, from countries like Canada, and also South Asia. And then a few countries in Africa like Nigeria, Angola, and it's mainly oil and gas, All right. Okay. They are also big exporters into the US market. So when the US imposes tariffs on imports coming in, it imposes a higher cost for those imports, right? But unfortunately, and this is something which I think Mr. Trump needs to understand, the cost is borne by the importer. It's not borne by the exporter. So if Zambia, for example, imposes 20% tariff on an import coming from South Africa, okay, it's you and me who are going to pay that 20%. It's not going to be the South African exporter. The South African exporter has got his export price, okay? So the importer then buys it at that price. But when the goods are entering Zambia at the border, ZRA will charge 20%. And it's the importer who pays the 20%. It's not the exporter. So this is where I think, for me, I think that's where the disconnect is in terms of the policy that the president of the US is undertaking. This is where the disconnect is. And this is why he keeps on shifting positions. Okay? And this is why even in the tariffs imposed on China, he had to reverse them because Walmart, Target, these are the biggest retailers. Okay? Amazon, okay? They all went to him and said, hey, if you don't reverse this, we're going to face a situation where shelves will be empty. Because you can't in 3-4 months change your supply chain. You understand me? You can't suddenly say, oh, because things from China are now going to be, let's get them from India or let's get them from Zambia. You can't. It doesn't work like that. It takes at least a year or so in order to transform and change your supply chain and your suppliers and to make the necessary changes and adjustments. So that is where the issue is. So the impact, yes, is great. Okay? You cannot have this month tariffs are announced, next month they're suspended, again 2 months later because Europe says something that you don't like, you impose tariffs. So we need some consistency. And there's nothing wrong with putting America first. But to encourage economic growth, to encourage domestic manufacturing, it's not just about tariffs. There are other things that you need to do. For example, labor. How competitive is your labor? Okay? Skills. Do you have the necessary skills amongst that labor force? You know, the skills that the Chinese and the Indians have built up over many years. Do you have them? Are you able to produce the computer chips at a cost that makes sense, for the ultimate consumer? So those are the issues that need to be interrogated.
What are some of the key factors driving this trade war? I mean, I know you mentioned America first and of course, other interests, but what are some of the major factors?
I think first of all, the real driving force behind these trade wars is not necessarily America first. America first is for me is propaganda. Okay, because
it's Republican propaganda.
It's just Republican propaganda. It's basically right-wing propaganda. However, the real factors are that America has been de-industrializing, meaning the share of manufacturing in America's GDP has been declining over many years, right? Number one. 2, the competitiveness of American industry has been declining. 3, the population in America is aging. Okay? It's aging. The youth burst is coming from Africa. It's coming from Asia. You understand me? Okay? And you find that a lot of Americans, particularly the young Americans, are not interested in studying STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and management. A lot of them want to do business studies, economics, musicians.
Social media influencers.
Social media. Football. They want to play American football. They want to be basketballers, whatever, and they make a lot of money. And if you look at the share of services in the American GDP, it's huge. It's over 50%. It's getting close to 60, 70%. Financial services, computer services generally, logistics, all these things. These are the ones that are driving the economy. However, manufacturing continues to decline. So, and then you have a lot of social pressure in the US, okay? In terms of pressure, in terms of population, pressure in terms of immigrants, okay? Coming in, and then you have a section of Americans feeling like, oh, we are being overtaken, Suddenly, my neighbor is not white. My neighbor is black or brown or yellow, So all these dynamics have pushed the social cohesion, the political economy, what we call the political economy, in the direction of right wing, in the direction of saying America first. Let's put America first. But you can't do that in an economy that is so tied to globalization and global trade. It creates a dissonance, which that's a word my sister used the other day. And I said to myself, I should find a way to use it as well, dissonance. So it creates dissonance in the economic environment, okay? And so those are the things that are driving. And so Trump basically is responding to the social movement and the factors that are driving issues in the US.
Others have speculated looking at, America's quest to remain a global power of significant influence, not only in politics, but in business and economy as well. Others have said, well, these trade wars is just a means to sort of tame China, which is coming close to the United States of America and say, hey, we are the big guys here,
There is that as well. That's another major factor. But for me, the strategy that the US is using to so-called fight China is a strategy that is going to fail. It's not a winning strategy because as China has shown in just this period, in the last 3-4 months, when the US imposed 125% tariff, China imposed 145%. Okay? China immediately canceled imports of soybean, wheat, pork, pig. They buy a lot of pork meat from the US, and other agricultural products. And immediately, those farmers went to Trump and said, hey, you're killing us. Because what you have to remember, trade is a give and take. Do you understand me? Okay? So, America imports a lot from China, right? But China also imports from America products which America produces at a more competitive price. And most of the products that China imports from America come from the belt, the agricultural belt, what we call middle America. Okay? And this is the bulk of where the support for the Republican Party is. You see, all those farmers in Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Pennsylvania, all the way down, to the central Great Lakes region and all those, Michigan, Detroit, all these areas, they are producing products that China imports. And so China also, as a response, diverted to Australia, to even Africa. Tanzania right now is supplying about 500 to 1 million tons of soybean into China. Okay? And China now also is saying, okay, we need to open up new sources of supply. So therein is an opportunity for Africa. But at the moment, it looks like it's a negative for China, right? But it can become a positive because China can diversify its sources of supply. But for America, it will take them much longer to diversify from buying from China because the big industries in America are so linked to the supply chains of China that it will be very difficult. So, for example, China is the biggest manufacturer of chips, computer chips. And that it will take probably another 20 years to change that, if at all. They're the biggest supplier of lithium batteries of all sizes, from the smallest lithium battery to the largest. Okay? Solar panels and other equipment that goes with solar. China, again, is the largest. Okay. And where are they selling most of these? Into the US, into Europe, and into Africa as well. So, so the strategy should not be about fighting China. The strategy should be, how can we manage relations? How can we, for example, why can't the Americans provide some of that technology to African countries so that some of this production can be done in Africa instead of China?
You've hinted on the opportunity. I'd like you to elaborate further on that. This whole trade war thing, China, the United States of America, there's also Canada in the mix somewhere. What opportunity does this present for Africa?
A big opportunity.
Zambia.
Yeah, a big opportunity for Africa, a bigger one for Zambia. Because remember, so for example, already you can see Canada, they've established a Canada-Africa strategy for the first time. Canada now has a strategy for Africa. You see?
Thanks to the trade war.
Yes. It's driven, because Canada is saying, we're not just going to sit and let the US do whatever they want to do to us, right? So Canada now has an Africa strategy. Okay? Now, again on Canada, you know that, I don't know if you're aware, but our biggest investors in the mines are Canadian listed companies. Barrick Gold with Lumwana, First Quantum Minerals is also listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And then there are a number of other mining companies that are listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. I don't know, there's something about Canada, because Canada also has a significant mining industry itself, right? Both oil, gas, and other minerals, okay? So that's one example. China already is talking about enhancing its relationships and strategic partnerships with Africa, okay? Which is moving beyond, because a lot of it has been driven by China just wanting copper, cobalt, oil, gas, right? Primary commodities. But now China is seriously saying we need to look at investing into manufacturing and value addition. And so now there's an opportunity again to attract Chinese investment into value addition, which will create more jobs for our people, right? When you look at Europe is also now talking about having a strategy and a memorandum of understanding and agreements with African countries on critical minerals and other supplies. Okay, they are looking to increase investment by European companies into Africa. So if you look across, in fact, the European Union has even changed its strategy when it comes to aid. They now have what they're calling neighborhood development investment schemes, where they're going to be looking much more at driving European business, to facilitate investment into African countries. So if you look, a lot of countries, including Zambia, we now have projects and programs that relate to business environment, investment climate, green technologies, Europe is promoting that a lot. The circular economy, all that is being promoted. And so even when you look at other countries such as India and other Asian countries, they are all looking now to establish relations with Africa. What we need on our side is to be very strategic and have a very a focused approach. We can't just sit and just say, oh, yeah, let everything come. We need to also be proactive and say, okay, we understand you want to, but what we want is technology transfer. We want skills transfer. You understand? We can't just sit and just allow them to just come and invest without any sort of transfer of skills or technology, because then we'll just be doing the same things that we've been doing all these years, So the opportunity is definitely there, but we have to be strategic.
You are watching the People's Space podcast with me, Wenton Mavor, and my guest is Trevor Simumba, international trade expert and consultant. And of course, we are looking at the trade wars that are currently happening on the global scene, their impact on Africa and Zambia to be in particular. Now, you can win yourself some amazing prizes. All you simply have to do is get interactive on our platforms where the People's Space podcast broadcasts. That is YouTube under the handle the Center for Trade Policy and Development, and Facebook, and CTPD Zambia on Twitter, TikTok, and of course, other social media platforms. You just have to comment. And if your comment garners enough reactions and comments, you do stand a chance to be that lucky winner of excellent prizes, which include a hoodie, such as the one that I'm wearing. As you may know, it's getting cold out there, so you need something as warm like this. You can also win yourself some good mug cups, t-shirts, capes, and other amazing and exciting prizes that you cannot afford to miss out on. So let's get interactive. See you shortly after the break.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Mwendo from the Tax Justice Network Africa. Catch me on the People's Space talking about tax justice in Africa.
Welcome back to People's Space podcast. And of course, the conversation continues. We are looking at the trade wars that are happening on the global scene and their impact on Africa and Zambia to be in particular. And my guest is no other than seasoned international trade expert and consultant, Trevor Simumba. And before we continue with our conversation, again, let me remind everybody that you do stand a chance to be that lucky winner of amazing prizes, which include t-shirts, mug cups, capes, nice, fantastic items that can serve as good memorabilia and souvenirs. All you simply have to do is be interactive on the platforms where we do broadcast the People's Space podcast episodes, which include YouTube and Facebook under the handle Center for Trade Policy and Development, and CTPD Zambia on Twitter and TikTok, and also Instagram. And another important and interesting thing is that as you are on it, please remember to subscribe to our channels on these various social media platforms. And for that as well, you might just be that lucky winner that we can, be able to select for other interesting and exciting, fantastic prizes. We now continue with our conversation. Before we broke off, you spoke of the opportunity that Africa can be able to leverage on, including Zambia. And obviously, you did explain quite a lot. China is involved in this mix, and China is one of those important trading partners with Zambia, both directly and indirectly. How do these trade wars going to affect Zambia? Should they escalate?
Yes. Look, first of all, I don't think they will escalate because already there is de-escalation. There were negotiations held between the US and China, and thankfully, a good result came out. They've agreed to suspend all these tariff changes and to continue discussing. To be honest, I do not see a significant escalation. Of course, depending on domestically what happens, Donald Trump may continue to use these tariffs as a stick, okay? To try and dissuade the American public from looking at the disaster that we can see beginning to happen in the US, okay? If you look at the debates that have been going on about that bill, the recent tax bill and the budget, there's still a lot of domestic issues that have a great impact on US policy. Now, we know that the president is erratic. I'm sure you saw that meeting he had with President Ramaphosa, recently, quite erratic, and quite disappointing, actually. But from that perspective, I don't expect significant escalation. However, if we were to have an escalation, it would have a great impact on Zambia. Why? Mainly because of the critical minerals. That is the copper, cobalt, tantalite, and other manganese, nickel. Because for China, their biggest market, whether the Chinese like it or not, that's a fact. Their biggest market is the US. And if China significantly loses its share of the US market, that would definitely have an impact on us, because China will probably have to reduce its manufacturing output, which means it will reduce the imports of materials such as copper, lithium, and others, right? And then also it may affect China's ability to invest, to continue to provide support. You know, China is right now, China is Africa's biggest trading partner. Okay, it's Africa's biggest trading partner. So if there is a significant impact on China in terms of its trade flows with the US, definitely Africa is going to feel it. However, this is why I'm saying we have to be proactive. So China still imports significant amounts of food, okay, and agro-processed commodities. They still import a significant, because look, there are 1 billion people. They will never be able to feed their own people only by their own production, right? Because you soon enough run out of land, isn't it? So China will always import a significant portion of their food needs and other needs, okay? This is where now we have to be strategic as Africa. We need to bring investment into our agriculture, but also agro-processing, okay? So instead of exporting coffee as coffee beans, we should be exporting coffee produced in Zambia, okay, packaged. The Chinese will buy that, okay? They buy that from they buy that. You know, the interesting thing is that China buys a lot of commodities from Europe, okay, whose raw material comes from Africa, okay? Even copper. Do you know that China is our largest buyer of copper? 40% of our copper goes to China eventually. However, only 20% of that is directly purchased from the Zambian mines. The rest is purchased through Glencore, Trafigura, the traders in Switzerland. That's why you find that even copper that's going to China, when it's leaving the country, Zambia, the Weibi will say Switzerland. But the final destination is actually Shanghai, China, or Guangzhou, China. You see? So for me, the real opportunity is that Africa, but Zambia in particular, because Zambia has got good relations with China, long-term good relations with China. We need to uplift our relationship to a strategic level so that we can begin to attract investment in value addition. Okay, not just infrastructure as it has been, not just mining, but value addition, agro-processing, agriculture itself. You know, we are capable of supplying a lot of these commodities into the Chinese market.
You know, Trevor, international trade experts like you have repeatedly advised, you know, different governments to say, we can do this. But the question that I always ask is, and this is not only unique to Zambia, by the way, I mean, you have worked extensively on the continent and outside, and you know that this is something that is familiar to most African countries. Why do we always fail, you know, to just significantly put in place policies that will ultimately start driving this value addition agenda? We keep talking about it. You know, you hear experts on TV doing this. They've been advised by people like yourselves that can even help with the technical expertise to do these things. Yet we don't do them.
It's because the problem is that many African countries, policy is driven by the election cycle. You understand? They don't realize that you can actually implement policies in such a way that in that 5-year cycle, you can make progress, significant progress, and the people will see that you are making progress. Do you understand? But we tend to jump from one thing to another. Okay? Let me give an example of Zambia. When the president first came into office, right? Our current president, he correctly said, we need to restructure and reconstitute FISIP.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came up with, what was it called? Agriculture.
The comprehensive agriculture.
Thank you. Comprehensive agriculture transformation program, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I remember I participated in the workshops and all that. But we're still doing physics.
Mm-hmm.
We're still, we've got farm blocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
We even have a project at the Ministry of Agriculture, World Bank project, okay? It's supposed to support infrastructure development in those key farm blocks so that you can attract investment. To this day, zero investment has been attracted. So why? And now they're not going to do that because it's too long term. We need to do things. So now we are celebrating increased production of maize, okay, which most of it has been produced by our peasant farmers, but we will not even be able to pay a price for that maize that will enable these farmers next year to recoup, make a profit and be able to, again, next year we'll subsidize. You see? Okay? And we'll definitely subsidize because it's an election year. You see? So, for me, the problem has always been that our leaders are always short-term. Okay? They're always saying, what about, how can I make sure I can win the next election? Rather than saying, how can I ensure that I can implement my plan, my program, my manifesto, my policies, okay, to enable me improve, okay, and enhance diversification. In Zambia, we've been talking about diversification since independence. To this day, we still depend on copper. I was speaking with a senior mentor of mine, one of the people that has mentored me. Yesterday in the morning, we had breakfast together and we had a meeting. And we were just discussing. He made a point to me and it really hit me. He said to me, Trevor, we've been independent since 1964. And by the time we got to the 70s, we were producing approximately 800,000 tons of copper. Okay? In fact, about 700,000 tons of copper. Today, more than 30 years beyond, we are still at below 800,000 tons.
And Congo right here.
Even with the investment, and we are still just producing 800,000 tons of copper. And look at the trouble we have just to transport those 800,000 tons to be able to have the input, Mm-hmm. So he said to me, so what is the problem? He asked me, what do you think is the problem? I couldn't answer him. You see? And now we are talking about saying we want to produce 3 million tons. Just to produce an additional 1 million tons of copper will require 50% more power than we have currently. Will require to build more railways to make sure our railways are to transport. Because if we're saying we're going to transport that extra 1 million, just 1 million, I'm not even talking about 3 million, just that 1 million tons. Do you know that those of us driving cars will not have any space on the roads? Because the roads will be full of trucks every day going back and forth, just destroying the environment. And we're going to create more big holes. And we're still not going to see. And mining now is highly capital intensive. So you're not going to even create the kind of jobs we created in the previous years. You're not going to have the same number. You're going to have a reduced number of jobs. And so are we going to still just produce copper and not add any value? Not create any strategic industries that can supply so that we stop importing all our inputs into the mining sector? Are we still going to continue producing graduates from the colleges and the universities who don't even know how to do basic, what is this, welding, this specialized arc welding that you need in the mines, students who can't fix a motor, who can't produce machines and other tools that can enable us to be able to run the mines efficiently? Are we going to still keep on having full of expatriates in our mining sector rather than Zambians? I don't know. So we need a fundamental mindset change in our continent and in our country. We need to stop politicizing everything that has to do with economic development. Economic development should be driven by the most competitive and by the most multiplier effect investment and policy that would drive economic growth in this country.
I love the fact that, you've brought in the issue of academics. And I've always thought to myself that how do we expect to produce industry leaders, not just by terminology, but by practice, people that will revolutionize the industry in this country, if we don't go back, for example, to look at the School of Mining itself and ask ourselves, what is it teaching? Is it only teaching you to identify rocks, or it is giving you the requisite knowledge and expertise to be able to see how you can process those rocks into a finished product that we can export out there? So I think it's a whole subject altogether, obviously for another day that we can look at. But I'll take you back to another interesting thing. You mentioned the strategy that Canada is coming up with for Africa. And if you look at China, there's the 4CAC platform. The United States of America, I think some time ago,
Africa.
There was the US Africa. In Zambia, there was even the AGOA.
President Trump has announced that he wants to host a US Africa leadership summit sometime, I think, in the summer, early or late summer, and in New York. So again, even President Trump sees the importance
of Africa,
of reaching out to Africa.
Exactly. Yes. And one thing that strikes me the most about these meetings is that all these important countries that host these meetings know exactly what they want from Africa.
Correct.
They know exactly where to go. They're very specific with what they want on the negotiating table. Yes. Why is it that Africa, Zambia in particular, it's like, you're just going there to hear what they're going to give you?
It's Africa. Listen, remember, I worked at the AU for 3 years, and I was actually in the department that deals with trade, industry, mining, tourism, it was called ETIM, economic development, trade, industry, mining, and tourism. Okay? And it was our department that was responsible for organizing AGOA meetings between African countries who are part of AGOA and the US. We were also responsible for EU-Africa Forum, okay? And also 4CAC, basically China, Africa, okay? And I was involved. The time I was at the AU, I was involved in all these 3 meetings, okay? At a very high level. In fact, AGOA, I was the principal officer responsible for organizing that forum. We had it in Washington, D.C. That was one of my last assignments, just before I left the African Union. And we as technocrats, right? Remember, the African Union, we're basically civil servants, just that we're international civil servants, okay? So we are technocrats, we're technical people. So we don't deal with the politics, okay? We simply provide technical advice and provide input into those meetings. And we convinced our chairperson at that time, Musa Faki, to say, Chair, we need to discuss this issue that our cooperating partners are always prepared, as you've said, the EU knows exactly what they want, okay? So we need to have a meeting ourselves as before, exactly. And we managed to do that for AGOA and the EU Africa, and it worked very well. For the first time, we went to Washington, D.C. with a very clear common position as African countries. And our position was, number one, AGOA should be extended, okay, beyond the 2025. Secondly, AGOA should be transformed. It should no longer be a unilateral, because AGOA is a unilateral. It's the American government that said we're going to offer these tariff reductions, right? But they can withdraw it because it's unilateral. It's not a negotiated agreement. Thirdly, we said we need to move beyond just trade and ensure that US investment is also channeled into Africa. We need skills transfer, technology transfer, right? So that Africans can benefit also from exchanges, okay? With the US, you can send the students, like, for example, engineering students, send them to NASA, for instance, just for them to open up their minds and get a different perspective, right? Because this is what China has been doing for some time with Africa. A lot of our doctors are trained in China, a lot of our engineers, a lot of our mathematicians, all these, they've been trained in China. That's a fact. Scholarships are given by China from bachelor's all the way up to PhD, right? So we needed to see that. And it worked very well. And we had a very good meeting when we were in DC. Same thing happened with the EU. And that is how we were able to get the EU to put more resources into the European Investment Bank, and to be able to promote programs and projects in Africa that promote investment promotion and facilitation. So it can be done. But the issue is that you have to bring the governments together, and provide them the evidence and the information and enable them make decisions and unite. Because unfortunately, in Africa, and I've seen it myself in many meetings. I mean, I've been working in the continent for the last 25 years or so, and I've seen it where, I remember when we were negotiating economic partnership agreements with the EU. And at that time, I was working in West Africa. So I was in the ECOWAS Commission as an advisor, technical advisor. And so we were in a meeting, and I won't name the countries, but about 5 Anglophone countries, right, were taking a certain position, okay? And then I think 2 Francophone took a different position. And it was not a very difficult issue. It was just over a word. In fact, 2 words. The French side was saying we should say additional resources. The English side was saying, no, if we use the additional, it means you're saying they should add more resources. So we should just use the word, we should look for mutually beneficial resources, okay? That would help enable us. We took over 9 hours to debate and argue over that point. 9 hours. And this was at ministerial level. Ministerial level.
That's how serious.
At one point, I said to myself, are we really arguing about this? I asked my minister, I said, Madam, can't you just say, let's agree and, we move on? No. So, Emmanuel Mwamba, he can tell you, because Emmanuel even used to sit on what we call the permanent representative committee at the AU, PRC. Yeah. That's the regular decision-making body. It's all the ambassadors accredited to the African Union. He can tell you some of the crazy meetings that used to happen and how sometimes Africa can be so disunited and disoriented. So we really, even now, you can't hear of any, even at the regional level, we're not hearing about any common position in how to deal with this trade war that is happening. We are just in the periphery and just waiting to just be impacted, but nobody's being proactive.
I love the fact that you've mentioned, about a common position, but unfortunately, our time is not our best ally at the moment, and we're supposed to be concluding. As we conclude, building on the last point you've mentioned, what would your advice be to policy makers across the African continent with regards ensuring that we are not caught as casualties depending on the direction that this takes? And also, has this been a wake-up call, especially for countries with regards how we should shape international trade agreements and policies going forward? which we can do here. When they can be checked on one border once. That's it. Mm. Here we are at one stop. Our friends at no stop. Here we are at one stop. Mm. Thank you very much, Trevor, for coming through.
Thank you.
That has been Trevor Simumba, international trade expert and consultant, giving us his thoughts on the impact of the trade war that we've seen the United States of America, China, and other countries involved in. And of course, we're examining its impact on the continent of Africa and Zambia. And for me, I think the biggest takeaway is really Africa needs to be proactive, as you've heard from the expert himself. We shouldn't wait of how this thing is going to impact us, but we can be proactive at policy level and at the same time beginning to come up with a united position, most importantly on what Africa needs to do in response to this particular challenge or development that we've seen. And thank you for taking the time to be able to join us on this episode. And remember, you can still win those amazing prizes by simply being more interactive. Write a comment on our platforms, YouTube, Facebook, under the handle, the Center for Trade Policy and Development. Tag your friends over there. Let's converse on these important topics. And that particular comment that garners enough reactions will be able to earn you an opportunity to win T-shirts, hoodies, mug cups, and other amazing prizes that, are just too many for me to be able to list here, but they are available for you and are waiting for you. You can also do the same on Twitter and TikTok, Instagram under the handle CTPD Zambia. And most importantly, remember to subscribe on those following channels, and those that you can follow those respective platforms, and you might just be again another lucky winner that will be picked for that particular follow, and hit the notification button most importantly. From me, Winston Mavoro, it's out. See you next time.